The cold didn't just bite, it chewed. It gnawed at the edges of my elk-hide cloak, seeped through the thick wool of my tunic, and settled deep in the marrow of my bones. I'd felt colder, but this was a mean, spiteful cold. The kind that clings. Fjordal was the name of the village, though village was a generous term. It was more a collection of half-frozen shacks clinging to the side of a mountain like a dying man to a prayer. They always smelled the same, these places. Wet wood smoke, fear, and the sour tang of bad ale. They were waiting for me in the longhouse, huddled around a fire pit that threw more shadows than light. The elder, a man named Magnus with a beard like a frozen waterfall, stepped forward. His eyes, watery and pale, darted from my single good eye to the massive leather-wrapped head of my axe, stone grinder, strapped to my back. Bjorn One Eye, he breathed, the name a puff of white in the frigid air. You came. Your coin came first, I grunted, pulling off my gloves. Now show me what has you all hiding from your own shadows. They led me to a small, isolated cabin at the edge of the woods. The door was splintered inward, the frame shattered. Inside, the smell hit me first, the coppery stench of old blood, sharp and metallic. What was left of the woodsman, Lars, was spread across the floorboards like a butchered hog. I knelt, my knees cracking in the cold, and ran a gloved finger along the edge of a deep gouge in the floor. Not claws, too wide, too blunt. Something had dragged him. The work of a troll, I announced, my voice echoing in the grim silence. The villagers behind me murmured, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. A young one, probably. Reckless. Messy work. I looked at the mangled remains. The torso was ripped open, but the limbs were torn from their sockets with brute, artless force. There was no finesse here, no cruel intelligence. Just a dumb, hungry engine of muscle and bone. It was familiar territory. It was simple. Magnus wrung his hands, his knuckles white. That may be Bjorn? Lars. He is the third. But there are whispers of something else. Not just the thing that leaves a mess, but a ghost. Something fast. Something that takes people whole. He pointed a trembling finger toward the jagged peaks looming over the village. And some have seen a great shadow moving by the old quarry. A giant. I stood up, wiping my glove on my trousers. A giant and a ghost. Typical. Fear gives birth to monsters faster than any bog or cave. A scared villager sees a bear in the fog and swears it was a demon. They see a rock formation in the moonlight and call it a giant. I dealt in the tangible, the things you could put an axe in. One monster at a time, Elder, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. A giant in a quarry sounds a lot like a troll in its lair. I'll start there. The ghost can wait. He nodded, though the fear didn't leave his eyes. The quarry is cursed ground. No one has worked it in a generation. Good, I said, turning to leave. Then it won't mind me spilling a little more blood on its stones. Back in the longhouse, they gave me a horn of mead. It was watery and weak, but it was warm. I sat by the fire, sharpening the edge of stone grinder with a whetstone. The blade was old, forged in a time when the world was younger and angrier. It was made of black iron, etched with runes that bit into troll hide like acid. It had never failed me. The villagers watched me, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. To them, I wasn't a man. I was a solution. A tool to be used against the darkness, just like my axe. They didn't need to know about the aches in my joints, or the way my empty eye socket throbbed when the temperature dropped. They needed the legend of Bjorn One Eye, the troll slayer. And for the right price, I was happy to give it to them. As I worked, I thought about the kill. It was a simple equation. Trolls were creatures of brute force and low cunning. They were predictable. Their strength was their weakness. You just had to be smarter, faster, and more patient. You had to understand the geometry of violence, the rhythm of a monster's rage. This one, the one in the quarry, would be no different. It was a job, like mending a roof or tanning a hide. A dirty, bloody job, but a job nonetheless. I finished with the axe, its edge now so sharp it seemed to hum in the firelight. I strapped it to my back, the familiar weight a comfort. I ignored the whispers from the shadows, the stories of a fast-moving ghost. Such things were born of panic, phantoms of the mind. My world was one of stone, steel, and flesh. It was a simple world, a cruel world, and in it, I was king. The unease that had pricked at me in the dead man's cabin was just the cold, I told myself. Nothing more. Nothing I hadn't faced and broken 100 times before. Dawn broke gray and grudging, casting the snow in shades of dirty slate. I left Fjordal behind, the scent of wood smoke fading, replaced by the clean, sharp smell of pine and cold stone. The path to the old quarry was barely a memory, a ghost of a trail winding up the mountain's flank. The tracks were easy to find. Each footprint was the size of a dinner platter, pressed deep into the frozen earth and snow, scattering rocks as if they were pebbles. The air itself grew heavy, thick with the smell of wet earth, ozone, and something else, something foul, like meat left to rot in a damp cellar. The stench of a troll. The quarry was a gaping wound in the mountainside, a man-made canyon of fractured granite and scree. In the center of it, a hulking shape moved. It wasn't just a troll, it was a stonebreaker, a subspecies that had all but vanished from these lands. Its hide was not skin but living rock, mottled with patches of lichen and moss that grew in its crevices. Shards of raw quartz jutted from its spine and shoulders, catching the weak morning light. It stood twice the height of a draft horse, its arms thick as tree trunks ending in hands that were little more than granite clubs. Its face was a brutalist sculpture of jutting bone and shadow, with two dull yellow slits for eyes that burned with a stupid, relentless hunger. It hadn't seen me. I circled the rim of the quarry, moving with a predator's silence. This wasn't a battle of strength. That was a fool's game. This was a dance, and I would lead. I knew its weaknesses. Trolls have poor eyesight but acute hearing, and their massive, stone-like bodies, while tough, have brittle joints if struck just right. Their greatest weakness, however, was their single-minded rage. Once provoked, they were an avalanche of fury, blind to anything but the object of their anger. From my pack, I pulled a heavy iron bell and a length of rope. I secured the rope to a stunted pine, letting the bell dangle just over the quarry's edge. Then I moved to the other side, where an old, rusted winch system sat, a massive block of granite still suspended in its rotting harness, hanging directly over the quarry floor. The wood groaned under my weight as I tested it. It would hold. Barely. I was ready. I took a deep breath, filled my lungs with the freezing air, and let out a sharp, piercing whistle. The stonebreaker's head snapped up. Its yellow eyes scanned the rim, unable to pinpoint the source. I whistled again from a different spot. It let out a rumbling growl, a sound like grinding tectonic plates. Frustration was building. Now, for the bait. I tugged the rope. The iron bell clanged, a sharp, clean sound that cut through the silence. That did it. With a roar that shook the very stones beneath my feet, the troll charged toward the sound. It was magnificent in its fury, a walking landslide. It smashed through fallen trees and boulders, its granite fists pulverizing everything in its path. It reached the cliff beneath the bell and began to claw its way up, sending showers of rock and ice cascading down. While it was distracted, I sprinted to the winch. My boots slipped on the icy ground, my heart hammering against my ribs. The troll was almost at the top. I grabbed the heavy release lever on the winch. Its metal so cold it felt like it was burning my skin through my gloves. I put my full weight into it. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. The mechanism was frozen solid. The troll's massive, rock-hard fingers appeared over the edge of the cliff. "Come on, you piece of junk!" I snarled, kicking the gear mechanism. With a shriek of protesting metal, the lever gave way. The rope unspooled with a deafening rattle. The massive granite block, a tombstone weighing several tons, plunged downward. The troll, hearing the noise, looked up from its climb. Its dull yellow eyes widened with something that might have been surprise. It had no time to move, no time to even roar. The block hit it dead center. The impact was not a crash, but a deep, final thump, a sound that felt like the mountain itself had sighed. The stonebreaker didn't just fall, it imploded. Stone hide shattered, ancient bones turned to dust. It was buried instantly, gone from the world, erased by the very stone it mimicked. Silence descended, broken only by the whisper of the wind and the creaking of the empty winch. I stood there, chest heaving, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving a familiar emptiness in its wake. Another monster dead, another village safe, another pouch of coin in my pocket. That evening, the longhouse in Fjordal was a different place. The fear was gone, replaced by a loud, drunken joy. They hailed me as a hero, pressing horns of their best mead into my hands. This mead was strong and sweet with honey. I drank, letting the warmth spread through me. I accepted their praise, their slaps on the back. It was part of the job. But as I sat there, the roar of the fire in my ears, a strange disquiet settled over me. It was the same feeling I'd had in the dead woodsman's cabin, a cold spot in my gut that the mead couldn't warm. I looked at the laughing faces around me, their relief so pure and simple. They believed the nightmare was over. They had their monster, their trophy. I had killed the giant from the quarry. But what about the ghost? The fast-moving thing that took people whole? I pushed the thought away. It was nothing, a shadow born of fear. The real threat was a pile of dust and rock now. I took another deep drink. The job was done. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't found the real monster yet. I had only killed the one I understood. The celebration roared on, a bubble of warmth and light against the encroaching dark. Mead flowed freely. Stories were told, and for a few hours, the people of Fjordal forgot they lived on the edge of nowhere, huddled against a wilderness that didn't love them. I played my part, the stoic hero, nodding at their praise while my single eye scanned the room, a habit I could no more shake than breathing. The mead had dulled the ache in my bones, but not the cold spot in my gut. It was close to midnight when the blizzard hit. It came on suddenly, a solid wall of white that slammed into the village, howling like a hungry wolf. The wind rattled the longhouse and the cheerful din inside faltered. Then, over the shriek of the storm, another sound cut through the night, a scream. It was sharp, high-pitched, and cut off with a sickening wet gurgle. It was a sound that sobered a room faster than a bucket of ice water. The longhouse fell silent. Magnus looked at me, his face pale as the snow outside. I was already on my feet, stone grinder in my hand, the comforting weight of it a familiar anchor. I kicked the door open and plunged into the white chaos. The wind was a physical force, tearing at my cloak and driving needle-sharp ice into my exposed cheek. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. Another man, the village blacksmith, a bear of a man named Kyle, followed me out, holding a torch that guttered and smoked wildly. "Over here," he bellowed, pointing. There, in the middle of the village path, was a dark shape crumpled in the snow. It was a young woman, one of the tavern maids who had served me mead just an hour before. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the storm-choked sky with a look of final, uncomprehending terror. Her throat, it was not torn. It was laid open with a series of deep parallel cuts, so clean and precise they looked as if they'd been made with a surgeon's scalpels. The snow around her was turning a slushy, obscene crimson. This was not the work of a troll. This was not the work of any beast I knew. This was elegant, viciously, hatefully elegant. My blood ran cold. The ghost. A movement flickered at the edge of my vision. A shadow detaching itself from the greater shadows of the blizzard. It was low to the ground, impossibly fast. Not the lumbering mass of a troll, but something sleek, muscular, and fluid. It moved with a predator's grace that made the hair on my arms stand up. "What in the gods' names?" Cale whispered, his torchlight wavering. The shape solidified. It was canine, but far too large for any wolf. Its fur was the color of charcoal and shadow, its body a corded mass of muscle that rippled with contained power. But the eyes were what froze me. They glowed with a faint, pale light, and they were not the eyes of a dumb beast. They were filled with a terrifying, calculating intelligence, an ancient, hateful wisdom. It lunged, not at Cale, but at me. It moved faster than anything I had ever seen. I barely had time to bring Stonegrinder around. I put all my strength, all my years of training, into the swing, a blow that had shattered stone and pulped flesh. The axe connected. But instead of the satisfying crunch of bone, there was a high-pitched shriek of metal on something impossibly hard. Sparks flew. Stonegrinder, my legendary axe, bounced off the creature's flank as if I'd struck an anvil, the shock of the impact jarring my arms to the shoulders. It left nothing but a shallow, sparking scratch on the creature's hide. The beast didn't even flinch. It was on me in the space of a heartbeat. I tried to backpedal, but it was like trying to outrun the wind. A clawed foreleg swiped out. The claws were long, black, and curved like sickles. They tore through my thick leather jerkin, my wool tunic, and the flesh beneath as if it were parchment. A searing, white-hot pain exploded across my chest. I roared, a sound of fury and agony, and stumbled backward, clutching the wound. The creature landed silently on all fours, its head cocked. It watched me, its intelligent eyes filled with something I had never seen in a monster before. Amusement. A cold, clinical mockery. It could have finished me. I was wounded, off balance, my best weapon useless. But it didn't. It held my gaze for a long moment, the wind whipping its dark fur. It was a message. You are nothing. Your strength is a joke. Your legend is a lie. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it turned and dissolved back into the swirling snow, leaving me alone with the dead girl, the terrified blacksmith, and a pain unlike any I had ever known. I dropped to one knee, breathing hard, pressing my hand against my chest. My fingers came away slick with hot, dark blood. But it wasn't the pain that terrified me. It wasn't the wound. It was the memory of that impact, of Stonegrinder failing. My entire world, my simple, brutal understanding of it, had been built on the certainty that what I could hit, I could kill. That certainty was now gone. For the first time since I lost my eye in a troll den as a boy, I was truly, profoundly afraid. I was no longer the hunter. I was the prey. The pain was a living thing, not the clean, hot pain of a normal wound, but a gnawing, creeping cold that started in my chest and spread through my veins like ice. The village healer, a nervous man with hands that smelled of dried herbs and fear, stitched me up with trembling fingers. He plastered the wound with a poultice of moss and yarrow, but it did nothing. By morning, the skin around the stitches was turning a bruised, necrotic black. The cold was getting worse. Desperation is a bitter drink. It makes you do things you'd sworn you never would. It makes you seek help from things you despise. And so I found myself trudging through the sucking mud and skeletal trees of the Blackwood Marsh, heading for the one place everyone in Fjordal, including me, avoided. I was going to see the witch. Her name was Ulva, and she lived in a hut built on a small mossy island in the heart of the bog. The hut itself seemed to have grown from the swamp, a crooked thing of mud, twisted roots, and yellowing animal bones. Will-o'-the-wisps, faint balls of spectral blue light, danced over pools of stagnant water, their glow the only guide through the fog. The door creaked open before I reached it. She was standing there, a silhouette against the dim light inside. She was ancient, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, her back bent into a permanent question mark. And as she stepped into the light, I saw it. One of her eyes was a milky, sightless orb. She was a mirror of my own disfigurement. "So," she rasped, her voice like stones grinding together. "The great Bjorn One-Eye, come crawling to my door when his big axe fails him." There was no point in denying it. I pushed past her into the hut. The air inside was thick with the smell of 100 different herbs, of drying skins, and of something else, something earthy and wild. Jars filled with unidentifiable things lined the walls. Bunches of herbs and animal skulls hung from the rafters. "There's a creature," I said, my voice tight with pain. "It's not a troll." My axe. It couldn't harm it. I opened my tunic to show her the wound. The black veins spreading from the stitches were now clearly visible. She peered at it, her one good eye sharp and black as a crow's, missing nothing. She didn't touch it. "Iron and steel are useless against a rage born of blood and soil," she cackled, a dry, humorless sound. "You fought an earwolf." "A what?" "Not a simple werewolf born of a bite," she explained, shuffling over to a bubbling pot. "An earwolf is a spirit of vengeance, a curse tied to the land itself. When this valley suffers a great injustice, a betrayal that stains the very rock and water, the curse awakens. It finds a host, a human heart filled with enough darkness, enough rage or greed or sorrow to contain it. It does not change the body, it wears it." She ladled a thick green-black liquid into a wooden bowl. It smelled like grave dirt and rot. "This won't heal you," she said, handing it to me. "Nothing will, not completely, but it will slow the cold. It will buy you time." I drank it. It tasted as foul as it smelled, but a dull warmth immediately began to fight back against the creeping ice in my veins. "How do I kill it?" I asked, my voice raw. Ulva let out another dry laugh. "You still think like a butcher, One-Eye. You cannot kill a curse with an axe. The earwolf is intelligent, cunning. It's stronger than a troll and faster than the winter wind. Its power comes from its connection to the land and from the secret of its human host." She turned and stared into the fire, her one eye reflecting the flames. You want to stop it? You must sever that connection. You must unravel its secret. I will give you this, Hunter, a riddle. Its strength is in its lair, where the earth drinks and is never full. Its weakness is in its heart, where it hides what is left of its humanity. A riddle? I scoffed, the pain making me angry. I am a hunter, not a scholar. Then you will die, she said simply, her gaze unwavering. Your old world of simple monsters is gone. This is something new, something born of human evil, wearing the skin of a beast. It's playing with you, you know. It wounded you, but it let you live. It wants you to feel helpless. It wants to break your mind before it breaks your body. I stood there, the foul taste of her potion in my mouth, the cold still pulsing in my chest. She was right. The creature's mocking eyes flashed in my memory. This wasn't a hunt anymore. It was an execution, and I was the one on the block. The world was no longer black and white. It was a murky, terrifying gray. Where the earth drinks, I muttered, turning the words over. It was a fool's errand, a witch's nonsense. Find it, Bjorn One-Eye, she whispered, her voice suddenly serious. Or the cold in your chest will be the last thing you ever feel. I left her hut and stumbled back into the fog-shrouded marsh, the witch's words echoing in my head. I had come seeking a weapon, a weakness I could exploit with steel. Instead, she had given me a puzzle wrapped in a curse, and as the spectral bog lights danced around me, I felt a new kind of fear. The fear of an enemy I couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't fight with the only methods I had ever known. The witch's potion worked in its own grim way. It didn't heal the wound, but it held the creeping, necrotic cold at bay, turning the sharp agony into a dull, constant throb, a permanent reminder of my failure. For 2 days I ranged through the forests and foothills around Fjordal, a ghost myself, ignoring the fearful glances of the villagers. I was hunting for a riddle's answer, for a place where the earth drinks, and I was following tracks, not the heavy, clumsy prints of a troll, but the fainter, four-toed tracks of the earwolf. They were maddeningly difficult to follow, disappearing on rocky ground only to reappear miles away. The beast was toying with me, I knew it. The tracks led me high into the mountains toward a narrow, jagged canyon known as the Widow's Maw. The wind whistled through the rocks, a mournful, lonely sound. As I drew closer, I heard other sounds, a deep, guttural roaring that I knew all too well, and a series of high-pitched, savage snarls. Sounds of a fight. I crept to the edge of the canyon and peered down. What I saw turned my blood to ice. In the narrow gorge below, another troll was locked in combat. This one was different from the Stonebreaker. It was a cave troll, larger, bulkier, with a pale, slick hide the color of a grub. Its arms were disproportionately long, ending in dirty, broken claws. It was pure, primal power, a living engine of destruction. It swung its massive fists, each impact against the canyon walls sending chips of granite flying like shrapnel. Its opponent was the earwolf, and it was losing. Terribly. I watched, hidden behind a snow-dusted boulder, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't a fight. It was a dissection. The cave troll represented everything I had built my life on fighting. Immense strength, mindless rage, raw elemental power. It was the old world, the world of simple monsters. And the earwolf was tearing that world apart. The creature was a blur of black fur and deadly grace. It never stood still. It used the canyon walls as its playground, running horizontally along sheer rock faces to avoid the troll's clumsy, smashing blows. The troll would roar in frustration, pulverizing the spot where the earwolf had been a second before. The beast was not just faster, it was smarter. It wasn't trying to match the troll's strength. It was using the troll's own power against it. It would dart in, its claws flashing. It didn't aim for the thick, rubbery hide. It targeted the weak points I knew so well, but with a speed and precision I could only dream of. It raked its claws across the troll's eyes, blinding it. It dodged a clumsy swing and ripped into the tendons behind the troll's knee, hobbling it. The giant staggered, roaring in pain and confusion, swinging blindly. The earwolf danced around the flailing titan, a patient, sadistic predator. It was exhausting the monster, bleeding it, breaking it down piece by piece. Finally, as the troll sank to one knee, bellowing in agony, the earwolf saw its moment. It coiled its powerful legs and launched itself through the air. It was a beautiful, terrible leap. It landed on the troll's broad back, clambered up its neck, and sank its fangs deep into the base of the troll's skull. There was a sound like a great tree splitting, a wet, final crack. The cave troll shuddered, a long, low moan escaping its lips. Then it crashed to the canyon floor, the ground trembling with the impact. Dead. The earwolf stood upon the corpse of its vanquished foe, its chest heaving. It threw back its head and let out a howl, not the long, mournful sound of a common wolf, but a triumphant, terrifying scream that echoed through the mountains. It was a sound of absolute dominance. And then, the worst part. It slowly lowered its head, its glowing eyes scanning the rim of the canyon. They swept past my hiding place once, then snapped back, locking directly onto me. There was no mistaking it. It knew I was there. It had known all along. The fight hadn't just been a territorial dispute. It had been a performance, a demonstration, staged for my benefit. The message was brutally clear. The creature you dedicated your life to hunting, the monster that made you a legend. I can kill it like it's nothing. I can tear it apart for sport. Now, imagine what I will do to you. I stayed frozen, my hand gripping the hilt of stone grinder, the weapon feeling like a useless toy. The earwolf held my gaze for a long, chilling moment. It didn't attack. It didn't need to. It had already won this round. With a final contemptuous snort, it turned and loped away down the canyon, disappearing into the shadows. I remained behind the rock for what felt like an eternity, my body trembling. The cold in my chest was back with a vengeance, a deep, soul-crushing chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I had just witnessed the death of my world. Everything I was, everything I knew, had been rendered obsolete, slaughtered, and left to rot on the floor of a forgotten canyon. The legend of Bjorn One-Eye was a joke, and the monster was laughing. The image of the earwolf standing victorious over the dead troll was burned into my mind. It was a symbol of my own obsolescence. As I stumbled away from the widow's maw, my thoughts were a chaotic storm. But one phrase from the witch kept circling back. A piece of driftwood in a maelstrom, where the earth drinks and is never full. It was a mad thought, a child's riddle, but it was all I had left. I forced myself to think, to push past the fear. Where does the earth drink? A river? A spring? No, that felt too simple, too natural. This was a curse, something foul and unnatural. My mind drifted to the local legends, the ghost stories the villagers told their children to keep them from wandering too far. There was one, a tale about a place deep in the oldest part of the forest, the Sunken Grove. and in its center, a well that was said to be bottomless, a place where, as the stories went, you could drop a stone and never hear it land. The thirsting well. It took the rest of the day to find it. The forest grew older and stranger as I walked, the familiar pines giving way to gnarled, leafless oaks that looked like skeletal hands clawing at the gray sky. The air grew still and heavy, and the snow on the ground was thin, as if the land here was too cold and barren to hold it. I found the grove in a hollow where the shadows seemed to pool. The trees here were dead, their bark peeling, their branches twisted into agonized shapes. And in the center stood the well. It was ancient, its stone curb crumbling and covered in a sickly green moss. A heavy rotting wooden lid lay half off, revealing a circle of perfect impenetrable blackness. The air around it was freezing, carrying a faint, foul odor of decay and damp earth. This was the place. I could feel it in my bones, in the way the wound in my chest ached with a renewed vicious cold. The snow around the well was trampled and disturbed, not by the heavy prints of a troll, but by the same four-toed tracks of the earwolf mixed with something else, the prints of human boots. My heart hammered. The creature came here, in both its forms. I approached cautiously, my hand on the hilt of my axe. The stone curb was covered in markings, but they weren't the familiar angular runes I used to ward off trolls. These were jagged, frantic scratches, gouged deep into the stone as if by claws. They were symbols of rage, patterns of violence with no discernible meaning. This wasn't a lair. Ulva was right. It was an altar, a place of power. I peered over the edge, into the darkness. The blackness was absolute. It seemed to pull at the light, to swallow sound. No wind whispered from its depths, only a profound and chilling silence. It felt like staring into the throat of a dead god. My eye caught a glint of something on the mossy edge of the stone curb. I leaned closer, my breath misting in the frigid air. It was a small object, caught on a splinter of rock. I picked it up with trembling fingers. It was an earring, a simple silver loop with a tiny blue stone. I recognized it instantly. I had seen it just a few nights ago, dangling from the ear of the tavern maid who had served me mead. The girl who had been slaughtered in the blizzard. The air rushed from my lungs. The horror of it settled on me, heavy as a shroud. The earwolf hadn't just killed her. It had brought a trophy, a token of its kill, to this unholy place. This wasn't just mindless slaughter. It was a ritual. A sacrifice offered to the thirsty earth, to the bottomless dark. My fear was rapidly being replaced by a cold, hard rage. This thing, this monster, was not just a beast. It was a defilement. It took human lives and twisted them into a sick ceremony. Ulva's words came back to me. Its weakness is in its heart, where it hides what is left of its humanity. It had brought a human trophy, but it also left human tracks. It was a creature of two worlds, beast and man. And if it was part man, it had a man's weaknesses. It had a secret to keep. It had a life to protect. I looked from the earring in my hand to the trampled snow to the claw marks on the stone. The monster wasn't some mindless force of nature that lived in the wild. It slept in a bed. It ate at a table. It walked the single, snow-choked street of Fjordal. It was hiding in plain sight, wearing a human face. And I had been drinking and talking with them completely blind. The real hunt, I realized, had not even begun. I had one half of the witch's riddle. The well was the creature's altar, its place of power. Now I needed the other half, where it hides what is left of its humanity. My first thought was a literal one. A home, a cabin, But that felt too simple for a creature this cunning. It would be something more symbolic, more deceptive. A place to hide not its body, but its secret. The tracks leading away from the well were a mix of wolf and man, a confusing trail that seemed designed to lead nowhere. But the earwolf, for all its intelligence, was still driven by instinct. And the instincts I knew best were those of a predator trying to protect its territory. It would create a decoy, a false lair, a place to point the finger of blame, to throw any would-be hunters off its scent. And what better decoy in these mountains than a troll cave? There was one such cave a few miles north of the village, carved into the base of the mountain's highest peak. It was a classic troll den, notorious in local lore, a place children dared each other to approach. It was the perfect stage. The hike was arduous, the wound in my chest a constant cold companion. As I neared the cave's mouth, a dark, jagged slash in the rock face, the smell of troll hit me. It was thick and musky, the same scent I'd followed to the quarry. But something was wrong. It was too strong, too deliberate. It smelled like a lure. I drew Stone Grinder, its weight feeling less reassuring than ever, and stepped inside. The air was cold and still. The cave was large, a single cavern with a high, vaulted ceiling from which icicles hung like teeth. The floor was littered with the usual debris of a troll's life: shattered animal bones, splintered wood, and filth. But it was all arranged too neatly. It looked less like a home and more like a museum exhibit titled Troll's Lair. In the back of the cave, my torchlight fell upon a pile of objects that did not belong. There were scraps of torn clothing, the fabric and colors familiar from the missing villagers. A child's wooden horse, its paint faded. A hunting knife with a distinctive antler handle that had belonged to Lars, the first victim. It was a collection of trophies, a curated display of the monster's work, all designed to scream one word: troll. It was a brilliant deception. The beast had killed the troll in the quarry, then used this empty den to frame its kind for all the other murders. It was creating a simple narrative for the simple people of Fjordal, with a simple monster they could understand and fear. It was hiding its own complex, human-born evil behind a mask of bestial stupidity. I walked deeper into the cave, my boots crunching on bone fragments. This was where it hid its secret, by burying it in an obvious lie. It was hiding its humanity by pretending to be an inhuman monster, and then I saw it. In the fine layer of dust near the back wall, away from the carefully arranged piles of bones, was a single perfect footprint. It was not the splayed, clawed print of a troll. It was not the four-toed print of the earwolf. It was the clear, unmistakable impression of a human boot. A boot with a worn heel and a distinctive tread pattern. It was fresh. The dust around it was undisturbed. The footprint was leading out of the cave. My blood turned to ice. It all clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening finality. The monster wasn't hiding in the forest. It was hiding from the forest. It lived in Fjordal. It walked among them. The cave wasn't its lair. It was its locker room, a place to store its props and costumes before returning to its human life. The entire wilderness, this vast, terrifying expanse of snow and rock that the villagers feared, was its alibi. I stood there in the suffocating silence of the cave, the torchlight flickering on the cold stone. A moment ago, the wilderness had felt like a prison, a vast, snowy cage I was trapped in with a monster. Now, the roles were reversed. The true cage was Fjordal, a tiny, isolated village of a few dozen people locked in by the snow, and one of them was a monster capable of tearing a giant to pieces. I had come here looking for a beast's den. Instead, I had found a man's secret. The hunt was no longer in the wild mountains. It was in the narrow, snow-choked streets of the village. I had to go back into the trap, back among the sheep, knowing one of them was a wolf in the truest, most terrible sense. And it knew I was coming. Returning to Fjordal was like willingly walking back into a bear trap you'd just watched snap shut. The village, once a simple haven from the dangers of the wild, now felt suffocating. Every snow-covered roof seemed to hide a dark secret. Every plume of smoke rising from a chimney felt like a dragon's breath. I was no longer an outsider coming to save them. I was a prisoner locked in with a killer. My demeanor had changed, and the villagers noticed. My gruff confidence was gone, replaced by a cold, watchful paranoia. I saw suspicion in their eyes. The hero who had failed to stop the killings was now a brooding, wounded stranger. They started to avoid me, their whispers following me like my own shadow. I spent my days observing, my hunt now one of quiet intelligence rather than brute force. Every man in the village became a suspect. Was it Kale, the blacksmith? His massive arms and shoulders certainly held the strength. He could swing a hammer all day without tiring. Could he not also tear flesh from bone? I watched him at his forge, the muscles in his back coiling and uncoiling, and I felt a chill. Or was it Finn, the quiet trapper who spent most of his time in the woods? He knew the mountains better than anyone. He moved with a predator's silence and had eyes that missed nothing. He was a man more comfortable with animals than people. Perhaps he had grown too comfortable with the beast within. Even Magnus, the elder, fell under my suspicion. He was the one who had hired me, the one who directed my attention to the troll first. Was it a clever misdirection? A way to control the hunt from the beginning? The nights were the worst. I would sit in the small cabin they'd given me, the door barred, stone grinder resting against the wall, feeling useless. I was listening for a footstep in the snow that was too light, for a scratching at the door that was not the wind. The earwolf knew I had uncovered its secret. I had visited its altar and its false lair. It was aware that the hunt had changed, and now the psychological war began. One morning, I opened my door to find a gift on the threshold. It was a strip of pale, rubbery hide, unmistakably from the cave troll I had seen slaughtered in the canyon. It was laid neatly on my doorstep, a mocking trophy, a reminder of its power and my impotence. It was a message. I was there. I watched you. I can get this close whenever I want. The paranoia began to eat at me. I started to see shadows move where there were none. I would catch a villager's eye across the tavern, and in their gaze, I would imagine a flicker of the same cold, intelligent malice I'd seen in the eyes of the beast. Was I losing my mind? Was that the creature's goal? To turn me into a raving madman that the villagers would eventually drive out or kill themselves? I had to force myself to be methodical. I thought back to the boot print in the cave. It was a man's boot, size 10 or 11, with a worn heel. I started watching people's feet, a grim, absurd focus for a legendary troll hunter. Kale's boots were huge, caked in soot. Fins were wrapped in furs, their shape indistinct. It was a fool's errand. Half the men in the village wore similar boots. The real clue, I realized, was not in strength but in deception. The earwolf was a performer. It was wearing a mask. So who was the best actor in Fjordal? Who wore their human skin most convincingly? My attention turned away from the obvious suspects, the strong and the silent, and toward the ones who seemed the most harmless, the ones who faded into the background. The wound in my chest throbbed, a cold metronome counting down the days until the next full moon. I was running out of time. The creature had all the advantages. It was stronger, faster, and it was hidden. I was wounded, alone, and surrounded by potential enemies. One evening, as I sat in the tavern, nursing a horn of ale and watching the faces in the firelight, I saw a young man, Eric, the village scribe, accidentally knock over a tankard. He was a frail, nervous boy, always hunched over his books and scrolls, with ink-stained fingers and a perpetual look of apology. As he bent to clean up the mess, his tunic rode up slightly, revealing the top of his boot. For a split second, I saw the tread, a familiar pattern, and the heel was worn down on the outside edge. My heart stopped. It couldn't be. Not him. He was the weakest man in the village, a scholar, not a warrior. But as I watched him stammering apologies, his eyes darting around nervously, I saw it. It was the perfect mask. No one would ever suspect the timid boy who was afraid of his own shadow. The one who chronicled the village's history could also be the one drenching its future in blood. The earwolf wasn't the strongest man in the village. It was the one with the darkest secret, the one hiding the deepest rage behind the meekest facade. And I, the great Bjorn One-Eye, had been looking in all the wrong places. The full moon hung in the black sky like a polished skull, bathing the snow-covered landscape in a cold, spectral light. The air was still pregnant with violence. I knew tonight was the night. The transformation would be upon him, the curse at its peak. And I would be ready. My plan was a desperate gamble, a repudiation of everything I had ever been. I wasn't going to fight the earwolf. I had seen what it could do, and I knew that was suicide. I had to trap the man. I had to use his human mind, his arrogance, against him. I spent the day preparing my own stage at the thirsting well. My trusty stone grinder leaned against a dead tree, a silent, useless monument to a bygone era. In its place, I had new tools I'd bartered for with the last of my coin and a promise to the blacksmith. I had 3 heavy hunting nets, their ropes interwoven with fine silver wire that glinted in the moonlight. I had 4 torches, their heads wrapped in rags soaked not in oil, but in a pungent, acrid mixture Ulva had told me how to create from wolfsbane and rendered mountain ash, a poison to the beast's senses. I rigged the nets in the trees surrounding the well, their trigger ropes tied to a single point near the stone curb. Then I drew a wide circle in the snow around the well, not with runes of power, but with a thick line of salted rowan ash from the witch's hearth. It wouldn't hold the beast, but Ulva claimed it would sear its spirit, disrupt its connection to the cursed ground. My bait was myself. As dusk settled, I walked openly through the village to the sunken grove. I made sure Eric the scribe saw me. I saw him watching from the window of his small house, his pale face a mask of feigned indifference. He would follow. His pride would demand it. He would want to watch me die at the heart of his power. I waited by the well, the cold seeping into me, the wound in my chest a pulsing knot of ice. The silence of the dead grove was absolute. Then a twig snapped. He stepped into the clearing, still in his human form. Eric. He looked even smaller and more pathetic out here, a boy playing at being a man. But his eyes were different. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, chilling confidence. "I knew you'd figure it out, One-Eye," he said, his voice no longer the timid stammer of the scribe, but a low, steady tone that dripped with contempt. "You're more clever than you look."
"Why?"
I asked, my voice flat. "Why all the killing?" He laughed, a thin, ugly sound. This village, this land, it took everything from me. My family died of the winter plague because Elder Magnus refused to share the stores. Kale the blacksmith mocked my father's weakness. Lars the woodsman cheated us in a trade. They are all part of the rot. The land felt my hatred. It answered. It gave me the power to cleanse this place, to make them pay. As he spoke, the change began. It was a horrifying, unnatural thing. His back arched with a sound of cracking vertebrae. His skin seemed to ripple and stretch, bones shifting and elongating beneath the surface with wet, snapping sounds. His quiet whimper of pain twisted into a guttural snarl as his face lengthened into a muzzle, teeth extending into yellowed fangs. Fur, black as night, sprouted from his skin. It was not a clean transformation. It was a violent, agonizing birth. The earwolf stood before me, larger and more terrifying than I remembered. It took a step, and its clawed foot sizzled as it crossed the line of ash. It recoiled with a snarl of pain and fury. It was working. "Your tricks are meaningless," it growled, its voice a deep, resonant echo of the boy's. It lunged, not at me but to the side, trying to circle around the well. It was exactly what I had hoped for. I stood my ground, the trigger rope clutched in my hand. It skirted the edge of the ash circle, its eyes burning with hateful intelligence, looking for an opening. It was fast, a blur of shadow, but I wasn't trying to match its speed. I was waiting for it to cross the one specific spot. There. I yanked the rope with all my might. The nets, weighted with stones, dropped from the trees. One missed, but two fell true. They enveloped the beast in a tangle of rope and shining silver. It roared, a sound of pure, frustrated rage. The silver wire burned its hide, sending up puffs of acrid smoke wherever it touched. It thrashed and tore, the heavy ropes groaning under the strain. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed one of the prepared torches, lit it from my tinderbox, and threw it. The torch landed near the struggling creature. The wolf's bane-laced fumes filled the air, a scent that was nauseating to me, but clearly agonizing for it. The earwolf choked and gagged, its powerful struggles weakening. It was working. My heart soared. I had it. Then, with a final explosive burst of strength, it ripped one of its legs free. One of the nets tore open. It was getting loose. I scrambled for another torch, my fingers fumbling with the flint and steel. The beast lunged, half tangled in the remaining net. It was wounded and enraged. It slammed into me, sending me flying backward. My head hit the stone curb of the well with a sickening crack. The world exploded into stars. The trigger rope was ripped from my hand. I lay there dazed, the earwolf standing over me, dripping blood and saliva, its eyes promising a slow, painful death. The earwolf loomed over me, a nightmare of black fur and silver-burned flesh. Its growl was a low rumble of victorious thunder. I could smell its hot, foul breath, the stench of blood and grave dirt. My head throbbed, the world swimming in and out of focus. Stonegrinder was yards away. The nets were torn. My plan, my one desperate gamble, had failed. It lowered its head, its fangs dripping, aiming for my throat. I did the only thing I could. I rolled, a clumsy, desperate movement, away from its jaws and toward the gaping black mouth of the well. My body slammed against the crumbling stone curb. The beast lunged again, its weight crashing down on me. Its claws dug into my shoulder, and a fresh wave of agony washed over me, so intense it cleared my vision. I was pinned. Its face was inches from mine, its intelligent, hateful eyes boring into my own. In their reflection, I saw not a monster slayer, not a legend, but a broken old man about to die in the snow. My hand, flailing for purchase, found something on the stone curb. A loose rock, heavy and slick with moss. It wasn't a weapon. It was nothing. But it was all I had. With the last of my strength, driven by pure animal instinct, I swung the rock. Not at the creature's head. That was useless. I swung it at its foreleg, the one pinned under a strand of the silver-laced net. The impact was dull, but the sharpened edge of the rock scraped the silver wire deep into the beast's flesh. It screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that was not of a beast, but of a man. The silver, driven into its muscle and bone, was pure poison. It convulsed, its massive body arching off me in a spasm of pain. That was my chance, my only chance. I shoved with my legs, my boots finding purchase on its chest. The creature was off balance, its mind consumed by the searing pain of the silver. I pushed with everything I had left, all the fear, all the anger, all the humiliation. We teetered on the edge of the abyss. For a heart-stopping second, we were locked in a grotesque embrace on the lip of the well, a tableau of hunter and hunted man and monster. Then, with a final desperate heave, I pushed it over the edge. The earwolf fell. It didn't roar or snarl. The sound it made as it plunged into that absolute blackness was human. It was the terrified scream of the boy, Eric. The scream echoed up from the depths, growing fainter and fainter, until it was swallowed completely by the profound, eternal silence. And then, there was nothing. I lay on the edge of the well, my body a symphony of pain, gasping for air in the freezing night. It was over. I don't know how long I lay there. Eventually, the pain in my head and shoulder forced me to move. I crawled away from the well, my own blood leaving a dark trail in the snow. I picked up Stone Grinder, its familiar weight now feeling alien in my hand. It was a tool for a world that no longer existed. I stumbled back to Fjordal as the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of bruised purple and gray. The village was silent, asleep, unaware of the battle that had been fought for its soul. I didn't stop. I walked straight through, a ghost returning to the grave. At the edge of the village stood an old, weathered signpost pointing the way back to the world. I stopped in front of it. I looked down at Stone Grinder, at the runes that had protected me, at the edge that had slain countless monsters of the old world. It was a beautiful, deadly thing, and it was useless. With a grunt of effort, I swung the axe one last time. Not at a monster, but at the signpost. The blade bit deep into the old wood, sinking with a solid, final thunk. And there I left it. I let go of the handle, turned my back on it, and walked away. I left Fjordal not as Bjorn One-Eye, the legend. That man had died in a canyon, watching a troll get torn apart. I left as just Bjorn, a man with a scarred face, a wounded body, and a soul that had been irrevocably fractured. I had looked into the abyss, and the face that stared back was not a monster's, but a man's. The greatest horrors weren't born in dark caves or deep woods. They were born in the festering wounds of the human heart. My single eye had once seen a world of simple, clear-cut darkness. Now it saw shadows everywhere, not just in the forest, but behind every friendly smile, in every quiet village, in every corner of the world. The hunt was over, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than any winter storm, that I would be seeing monsters for the rest of my life.